By now, we're all familiar with the accusation that in Xinjiang there's forced labor camps, but also at the same time death camps and forced sterilization, and basically creating all the ghost images of the Holocaust on China. Now, there have been some recent developments in the last 2 years or so in that a lot of U.S. companies have been pulling out of the area as a part of their opposition to using slave labor, which apparently has never bothered them before. But now, the Gray Zone and one of its authors, Max Blumenthal, have uncovered some very interesting information with regards to this whole campaign against China. This is being pushed by a so-called workers' rights organization in the US, a bastion of workers' rights, by an organization called Coalition to End Forced Labor in the Uyghur Region. Now, they represent allegedly hundreds of civil organizations and unions across the world united in their displeasure or hatred of China. Now, as a result, at least a dozen American textile companies have moved out of the region and brought their operations somewhere else. Now, the first company to be swayed by this was Badger Sportswear, a company based out of South Carolina. Now, this is what they say according to the Gray Zone. The coalition's initiative scored its first success when it forced a college sportswear company called Badger Sportswear to abandon its factory in Xinjiang. University campuses across the U.S. began to boycott Badger products in December 2018 as the allegations of forced labor first reached the national media. Within weeks, Badger formally cut ties with the Hetian Taida factory in Xinjiang, which was accused by the WRC-led coalition of employing Uyghur detainees, while the Chinese government slammed Badger's decision as pathetic and based on wrong information. Its opponents in Washington took a victory lap. Now, once they pulled out, all those Uyghurs were left absolutely unemployed. Now, instead of, say, helping them, they decided to take $300,000 and give that to Uyghur exile groups rather than helping those workers who have now been left without employment. The capitalist doesn't want to pay workers. What a surprise. Now, this in turn has caused unemployment in Xinjiang to increase. Now, you know me, I'm not exactly a fan of modern-day China and its faux socialism, but it's very clear that the United States has no intellectual or moral credibility when it comes to making accusations of wrongdoings by other countries. So, where do these accusations come from if they are supposedly so reliable? They mainly come from the Workers' Rights Consortium, a coalition made up of several different groups which include the AFL-CIO Labor Federation, Uyghur exile organizations based in Washington, D.C., the home of human rights, Hong Kong-based separatist activities, and of course, all relying on noted Xinjiang researcher Adrian Zenz. Now, you may recognize Zenz as the head of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. Now, he's a guy that I challenged to a debate on communist history, who then proceeded to block me. Pussy. So what's significant about the source of all these accusations? Well, essentially, they all come from an echo chamber of US-supported groups and individuals, often outright receiving direct funding from the United States government. They're funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, or NED. Now, who is the National Endowment for Democracy? Well, you may remember them from their founding members saying things like this. The organization that was created by the US government do today what was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA. That has meant quietly funding civil society and media outlets to destabilize states where US seek regime change. Now, having that information, you can understand why myself and many other people around the world are very skeptical about the accusations that are being made about forced labor inside of China. So let's go over the history of all of these accusations. Now, this began with the Workers' Rights Consortium trying to get people to divest from Xinjiang, starting all the way back in 2018. By December 17th of that year, an article from the Associated Press appeared making the accusation that the Hetian Taida apparel factory in Xinjiang was a forced labor camp according to the WRC. The first target was Badger Sport. A day later, and of course doesn't seem suspicious at all, a press release from the WRC appeared calling for Badger Sport to leave Xinjiang. So what is the source of these accusations? Well, they're coming from Uyghur exile groups in Kazakhstan which receive funding from the US government, and a Google Earth image of a school that is right next to a factory. Of course, supplied by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, a right-wing think tank funded by the US State Department and the Australian Ministry of Defence and several arms manufacturers. Now, not long after that, articles of this supposed forced labor began to appear in the Financial Times and the New York Times, also coming from these same exiles sources funded by the US government, and also these other organizations, which claim to be impartial, which are also funded by the US government. Now, the primary Uyghur interviewed by the Associated Press was Rushan Abbas. She was the director of the Campaign for Uyghurs, a major separatist organization funded by the US government, which lobbies aggressively for sanctions on China. It should be noted that her now removed bio includes extensive experience working with the US government agencies, including Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, the Department of State, and various US intelligence agencies, and consultant at Guantanamo Bay supporting Operation Enduring Freedom. So if anybody understands human rights, it's these US organizations and the people who torture other people in Guantanamo Bay. Later, in June 2019, the WRC issued a 37-page paper accusing Badger of making a profit off of slave labor in Xinjiang. Of course, the accusation came entirely from the US-backed Uyghur activists, US state media outlets, and US-funded think tank pundits and Human Rights Watch, billionaire-funded international lobbying outfit whose moral outrage can be timed by US foreign policy. Now, there's an important name in this organization, and that is Adrian Zenz. Now, you might remember him as the far-right Christian extremist evangelical who says he believes God told him to destroy the evil, godless China. He's not just the head of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, he's also a man who has no actual credentials when it comes to talking about China specifically. And not only that, but in the past he's had to retract a lot of statements he's actually made because there was no evidence for them whatsoever. So what is the crux of their accusation? The connection between the Hetian Taida factory and the adjacent Hotan Vocational Education and Training Center, where the population of one works in the other. Now, Badger has always denied the accusations and actually put out a significant effort to prove that they weren't true. They pointed to a certification by a Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production, an international auditing body, who said there was no evidence of forced labor. Now, eventually, the WRC admitted that they didn't actually speak to anyone who worked in this supposed labor camp. And then on top of that, they actually admitted that they didn't do anything to help them, and that they were afraid that even if they did, they would make the situation work because of a supposed climate of fear among the employees. So, in their own summary, they acknowledge that their report did absolutely nothing to help them in any way, shape, or form, and in fact, might have actually made things worse. It is important to understand the full remediation from a workers' rights perspective. It is not achievable in this case. As explained in our report, any attempt to aid or support the affected workers runs the risk of subjecting them to retaliation by the Chinese authorities. The NGO claimed this without evidence. The best available substitute is for Badger to contribute to organizations working broadly to aid victims of the repression in Xinjiang. So basically what they're saying is that they don't have any evidence whatsoever for their accusations other than the testimony of individuals paid by the United States and satellite images of two buildings next to each other, and then having admitted that they didn't actually talk to anyone inside who actually worked in the supposed labor camp. So you'll imagine, or understand that people like myself and others who cast a great deal of doubt upon these accusations, you can kind of understand why we do it and why we feel that the United States has so very little credibility in this case. There are rightful criticisms to make of China and the way it chooses to conduct itself. However, these accusations are seemingly completely false. Now, while we certainly understand that there is a political struggle between the United States and China for leadership of the future, at least economically, we should not allow this to force us to lose any critical eye we have to find the truth about what's going on in the world. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.